Hi, it's March 7th, 2009. I'm Jan Rigsby speaking from Austin, and this is a teleconference on Pathwork Guide Lecture 73, which has the title of The Compulsion to Recreate and Overcome Childhood Hurts. And we're a little along in the tape right now because I've been pressing the wrong buttons, but now, if you'd like to introduce yourselves, I think I've got all the controls correct, and I apologize for the errors. Please go ahead.
This is Catlin in Atlanta.
Welcome, Catlin.
Harry in Marshall, Texas.
Welcome, Harry.
It's Randall in Donna Beach, East Falls, Australia.
Welcome to you, Randall. Okay, now there will be other people joining us, but this time I disabled the chimes so that we won't keep hearing ringing noises throughout the presentation as people go back and forth. So what I'm going to do, and I've said this several times before, a lot of this is repetition, but repetition helps, is this lecture is a key lecture. It's a critical lecture to comprehend the distinction between spiritual work and psychological work. And also it brings in a lot of concepts in the pathwork. And I find it fairly straightforward and easy to read if you have read all 72 before this. And I don't ask people to do that when they join the conferences or when they ask questions or get involved with pathwork. They normally don't read. But what I like to do, I like to put forward a context so you have a picture of where this lecture fits. So one of the things that I say periodically is, for some people the pathwork concepts are a little foreign. Human eyes. And it takes a lot of work to imagine a different perspective. So when you're reading the materials and you're thinking, but this or but that, one of the things that helps I think, now what could the guide be saying from a greater viewing position? This is not God speaking in these lectures. These are channeled lectures, and the guide says that he is a spirit, which means he has perhaps a larger perspective of what's going on than we do. In another place in the lectures, the guide says you have 4 or 5 dimensions. We have 20. Now, I don't know that there is a number, but I remember reading that someplace, so I'll use that number. If we're working in 5 dimensions, and the spirits in the spirit world are working in 20, they're going to be able to see nuance. They're going to be able to see depth better than we can. Just as if you were looking at something with a black and white camera and trying to figure out what color or shade it was. You can tell what color of gray, but it might be very difficult to really discern the hue of red or the hue of blue. So going from the earth plane to the spirit plane could be almost like going like Dorothy in The Wizard of Oz, going from black and white to color in terms of the number of hues of information that are available to you there that we don't have. Now I'm stressing that because critical in this lecture is the concept that you and I and every other human being on the planet came to this planet from spirit. That's home. And we came from spirit, and we made ourselves to some degree smaller to fit into human bodies and human minds. So to understand, to go backwards and try to understand what this is all about, we need to use our imagination to figure out what could we have been thinking when we came up with these plans. Now, another way to look at that is it's a term that I nickname baselining. And you can, it's a concept in accounting and in a lot of other industries and situations where the question is, where do you start from? So if you were reading financial reports and someone said this much out and this much in, well, is that today? Is that this month? Is that this year? Is this 10 years? Is that from the beginning of the operation? And you're going to get a lot of different viewpoints going back along that track. And for instance, today's trend could be down, yesterday's could have been up, a month ago you see a lot of seesawing. You get the idea. It's like looking at a stock market chart and continuing to go backwards in time. You get a smoother line and you get a better sense of where things are going. That's what context can give you. So when you baseline and you talk about a given situation and you say, my foot hurts, that's really not enough information. We need to know when it started hurting. We need to know how badly it hurts. We need to know if you've ever had, just like a doctor diagnosing, how long have you had this condition? When did it start? What degree is the pain? What's your family history? You know, it goes backwards and backwards and backwards because you're trying to get a picture of the entire organism. You're trying to get a picture of the entire situation rather than the circumstances of a given moment. Now, I'm going on and on about that because this is very, very valid when it comes to pathwork. So I'm going to switch now and try to talk about the context of the pathwork ideas within human societal paradigms because they're different. So the phrase I like to use, or the key word for me when I talk about this, is a phrase that I think actually came out of my lips when I was a kid. I believe I might have actually said, if I didn't say it, I thought it, I didn't ask to be born. And in that moment, what I was trying to express was, you dragged me into this mess. It doesn't work. I don't like it. I'm unhappy. And beyond that, there's an idea that if I had invented this mess, I would have structured it differently. Now, that's not just an individual's point of view. That tends to be a societal point of view. Even though we don't say it, we say so many things that reflect it, that it becomes a paradigm in our lives. So I sometimes practice writing examples ahead of time and then they don't work, so I do these things a little ad lib. So I don't have too many at hand, but you might be thinking of some. So any phrase that indicates, I am not responsible for this. This is a problem, and it's not my problem. I wonder why life is so hard. If I could do it all over again, I would. And insert the phrase of your choice. I would be taller, I would be prettier, I would be more talented, I would sing. Anything that you've thought about your entire life, if I'd been in charge, if I'd made these decisions, I would have done something different. All supposes that you got handed who you are. Now, the massive difference in perspective that Pathwork proposes, and the key lecture on this is Pathwork Guide Lecture 34, which is the, now I've dropped the word, procedure for reincarnation, the process of reincarnation. You get the idea, I completely dropped the word. But Pathwork Guide Lecture 34 talks about the process of preparation for, reincarnation. And it has a lot of information there that might be valuable that I'm referencing right now. What Pathwork says is you did select. You selected everything in your life that is hardwired. I'll explain that in a moment. but you selected it from a place where you had a bigger perspective and a lot of help. So you made choices regarding this life with the assistance of other spiritual people. And the reason you did that as far in terms of being with a team is that the team had every intention and does travel with you throughout this lifetime. So you're not down here by yourself. You're not alone. There's a plan and there's a team. And I like to think of it in terms of you're the team captain. You've got the ball. They're spirits. They can't move lamps and they can't they're not supposed to make things easy for you. Their job is to support and help accelerate the plan. So what I've just described is a shift in paradigm from this was what I wound up with to this is what I decided would be best in terms of raw materials. Now, best for what? Once again, the spiritual point of view is that we're down here to accomplish tasks of transformation. That we're here because in the world of illusion, and I did a teleconference previously on unity and duality, in this world of illusion, where we believe that we're mortal, when we believe that we're at risk, when we believe in winning and losing, right and wrong, bad and good, in this environment, distortions in our belief system, places where we do not align with spiritual law, can flourish. So the idea is that from the spirit world, we develop a plan where our distortions will flourish so that we can see them. In effect, what we're doing is an act of faith. We are certain that divine law is correct. We are certain that distortions will never work and that they will cause pain, but we are still clinging to them. So lifetime after lifetime, we come down here to basically wash these distortions out of our spiritual system by truly experiencing what the distortion produces. So that's the task. That's what we're coming here to do. So lecture 34 gives me a personal picture of a boardroom table and a lot of people sitting around, and I see lots of coffee cups and scrunched up napkins and silly things like that, where you're trying to work out, considering my state of development and what I need to do next. What would be the best possible working environment? And in that process, you are selecting your parents. Now perhaps you can see where that changes the baseline and the context of this lecture. Copying your parents out of blind, I'd like to be like my dad, is one thing. What the lecture is suggesting is that we have a natural affinity towards our parents because they were selected as ideal foils to accelerate our spiritual task. They're going to help us better than any other choice we could make at that particular time period. So in this proactive place of choosing our parents, we make decisions that affect every single aspect of the rest of our life. By that I mean that when you choose your parents, they're obviously alive and they are living in a certain time period. They're living in a certain culture. They're living in a phase of society, a phase of civilization. Your parents carry baggage from their parents and their all that cultural material that they're carrying, you're going to step into. Your parents are carrying DNA for specific manifestations of human life. They're carrying the tendency for their children to become a certain form. Okay? Tall, short, black, white, more males than females, weak, strong, all these things that a family represents. When you volunteer to be born to that family and you physically go through the process of enmeshing biologically with that family and therefore manifesting yourself as a form, this is what you inherit. So the choice of parents is going to bring a lot of key elements to play in your childhood. Now this goes down to the cellular level. So if you're born to family X that is blonde and light-skinned and very tall, it's not that you can't be born differently, you certainly can. And that may be something that you've pre-planned. But being different from that family is going to get certain responses from the community. You might be treated slightly differently in your family for being the odd one. They may love you and think you're cute, but you're quite different. So there's a place in human psychology where you can pretty much bet that if you come into a family like them or unlike them, into a society where you agree or disagree, flow with or flow against, that there are going to be a natural series of interactions that will begin to build your character and your personality. Now, sometimes I try to think of this like a billiard table or a pool table, where once the break happens, you can pretty much guarantee the first 2 or 3 shots. Like chess, the first move is going to dictate the next few moves. But it gets very, very complicated very, very quickly. And as these circumstances happen, and they're very, very complex, that's where you may be born in a certain given situation that might attract certain attitudes. And this reflects back to lecture 201, which is demagnetizing negative force fields. When you're putting out a certain energy, a family will naturally respond in not the entire gamut of given ways. That's probably not a good sentence, but you may get the idea. So with the psychology of your parents, with the culture and society, with where you are born in the family, whether it's first, second, or 12th, whether the family is rich or poor, whether the family has a history of intelligence and creativity, or whether the family is intellectually challenged. Is the family a minority in their community, or are they in the majority? All these aspects are the kinds of things that as children and young people, we think that we're just saddled with this stuff. And the perspective I'm inviting you to see is that we chose precisely these elements. And we chose them for reasons. Now, one thing people will say at this point is, what are the reasons? But I can't tell you. Because one of the conditions for this process of using human life to work on our distortions is that we have to forget. So if you can imagine coming down with the manual, just be reading the book while you were driving along or living along. You just, oh, I'm supposed to do this, and yeah, this will hit. And that's not really going to get you to give up distortions that you are clinging to on a spiritual level. In order for you to truly let go of a distortion, of a false belief, of selfishness, of believing that strength is good and weakness is bad, whatever it is that you have, where you are trying to gain an advantage or not, or whatever you're trying to do that is against spiritual law, you're not going to give up easily. So it is critical that you not know the plan, because you would try to outwit it. That's what we do. If you could have fixed it in the spirit world, you'd come down here with a different task. So there's a de facto here that you weren't able to fix it in the spirit world. So you've come here to be in the dark to some degree, with a plan that is going to send you down a certain road, where your distortions are going to have an excellent chance to manifest and develop. And perhaps you can see where that puts a different spin on the trouble we get to in this life. The trouble we get into in human life, to some degree, and I am not trying to make light of it, because what we're talking about here is human pain and suffering. But to some extent, the pain and suffering we feel has a purpose. And from a spiritual perspective, we felt that this was the best way to enact. Now I want to put a caveat in here. I am not saying that human suffering is a good thing. I am saying that there are spiritual reasons for it beyond my understanding. And that if we could have learned these spiritual lessons in a kinder, gentler way, we would. And some of us have kind, gentle lives, and some of us have deeply troubled and emotionally or physically violent lives. The truth that I have found when working with people is that everyone has violent, emotional lives. They just don't display it very much sometimes. So what I have learned in working with the material and getting rid of some of my own distortions of judgment or thinking that I'm better than somebody else is realizing that we are all the same and we all have a task at hand. And as the guide says, it's not my place to judge someone else's task. That your task might look easy to me, but that may be because I've already been there. Or it may be because I'm not ready for that yet. That your task is so mature that you can afford to do it in a quieter, calmer, saner environment than the task that I happen to be handling. So I could go on with that, but I think you've pretty much got the idea. So the guide says, do not judge other people's. You are exactly where you're supposed to be, doing exactly what you're supposed to be doing, with the raw materials that you needed. Now I'm using the phrase raw materials because as we build our lives, our free will begins to interact and we can begin to change a lot of things. But you can't change your gender. And you can't change your height after you've become 18 or 20 years old. And you can't suddenly invent musical talent. You can practice it and become skillful. But the basic quota of musical talent that you've got tends to be pretty much fixed. So this is another point. As I've been talking about what we give ourselves when we make our choices, it helps to think in terms of what we might withhold from ourselves. So if your spiritual task is to go down a road and do certain things, and athletic ability would enable you to bypass that task, perhaps you get born clumsy. If going down a particular road would be easier if you were quick-witted, perhaps you invent a human being for yourself that is more slow-witted. So from this perspective, if you look back and you say these choices had reasons, again, we do not understand the reasons, but they were choices and they were made from a place that is wiser than our human understanding might be able to figure out using the pieces that we have available to us. So once again, using 5 dimensions, we just can't make the puzzle come together. But if we had 20 dimensions, okay, now I understand. So the lectures are given to us from the perspective of 20 dimensions. Now, that's a long introduction to this lecture, but to me it feels very, very important to do that because, and I'll go into this in a moment, when we talk about parents and children, if we think of it from this different perspective, if we think of it in terms of my parents were chosen by me to help me develop in a certain way so that the rest of my life I am moving in a certain direction with certain attitudes. It shifts some of the pain of childhood. And it shifts some of the sense that we did not get what we needed. Because from a spiritual standpoint, that may be true, but it was also necessary. So Barbara Brennan wrote an article for what they do is they syndicate it throughout spiritual magazines. And she wrote beautifully and elegantly of a very simple example. If, for example, a baby's cries for attention are not immediately met, it may suffer a terrible sense of abandonment. That terror may be wired into this young mind and body and become part of its consciousness that never grows up. This undeveloped consciousness is what people often mean when they talk about their inner child. But it's not really an inner child. It's the remnants of consciousness of the child you were that have not grown up. It is your child consciousness that still believes and acts like a child. So unless the belief is addressed, the individual is likely to have issues around abandonment for the rest of its life. So where that fits in with this lecture is that when you choose parents and you see, for instance, that your mother is the mother you want is a good woman, but she tends, when she's nervous or upset, to withdraw, to turn inside. And that can look from another perspective like rejection, or like she doesn't want to give, when in truth she's simply self-caring. She's simply trying to hold a strong container about herself so that she can regenerate love, feelings of tenderness, or the energy that she needs to do what she needs to do. But these are adult psychological explanations. The truth is that a baby who is left alone for hours because the mother is not able to give it the nurturing that it wants and needs may independently make a decision in a part of its mind that is not fully conscious because the baby has no language. The baby may decide, I can't get what I need, and grow up thinking that it's not possible. But a different child, starting with a different task, might think, I need to try harder. I need to scream and shout. I need to be funny. I need to be more interesting. I need to be more so I can get what I need. Both babies may have felt that sense of not getting what they needed, but they would go in different directions even with the same parent, and that's why siblings can have the same parents and go off on multiple different directions that seem to make no sense, because the child itself, the spirit itself with the task, is actually in control of how it's going to interpret whatever comes at it. But the raw material, whether the mother over-mothers and smothers or walks away, or heaven help us all if the mother appears to be perfect at all times. Now, in my family, I had a lot, on one side of my family, I had a lot of very strong, very upstanding, very moral people that looked perfect to me. And I actually remember thinking when I was about 12 years old, I'm in deep trouble because I don't fit. I'm not that good. Now, somebody else might approach that situation and say, hooray, I have a wonderful, nurturing, caring environment. Well, that's their attitude. Mine was that my doubts, my questions, my concerns, and my impulses had no place to go in that family. So perhaps you can see where whatever a family is going to resonate in different ways depending on which direction you're coming from and the interpretations you make. So again, I'm working on context to put this lecture in. Because when we talk about, well, why would someone want, what, I'm going to back off for a second. Let's go from the back. Why would someone recreate a childhood hurt? Why would you recreate that? The premise of the lecture is that you recreate it because you weren't able to resolve it from your childhood. There's a place in you that just doesn't feel met, that doesn't feel finished, that feels like you failed, or that you aren't good enough, or that you were too much. Whatever it is that you feel that came out of your childhood that was not resolved, you're going to carry with you along the rest of your life. And you're going to unconsciously be looking for situations where you could either prove that you've changed or have an opportunity to learn and change, or prove that that judgment is wrong. It was wrong, it is wrong, it always will be wrong. I was always enough, you were wrong in making me feel or saying to me that I was not enough. So again, if a child, let's go back to the abandonment. If a child feels that it didn't get enough and it won't get enough, then a child might turn into an adult that feels a certain level of despair. Why try? I'm not going to get it. I never got it, I never will get it. And to some extent, children, although they protest things that are uncomfortable, they learn that that's home. Physical home, emotional home, psychological home. Those feelings are familiar to me. I survived them, they didn't kill me, and I know how to handle them. So there can be a natural attraction to the emotional climate that a child grew up with, whether or not it's dysfunctional, whether or not it's toxic even, whether or not it's good for you, there's a familiarity about it. So those are reasons why we would come to recreate similar situations that we grew up with in our adult lives. But what's the compulsion? And the compulsion is about that positive intention in you that really wants to get it, that's left over from back there, back in the baseline, when you had a task and you need to perform this. That is a driving force on a spiritual level that tells you there's something to do, but it doesn't tell you what. So we invent the reason. We use our powers of creativity, our powers of interpretation. We look around and say, what does all this mean? And we take the information and we put it together as best we can and try to make a life that fulfills us. But the compulsion includes the desire to overcome the distortion. Now, if you notice, I'm not being specific here. And the reason I'm not being specific, and the reason these teleconferences are nice, but that they're not really the gut level work that needs to be done, is that every single person's situation is different. So I can't give specific examples at length because your situation and mine and his and hers and theirs are all different. I remember in one of the last lectures that I was working with, the questions kept saying, but, just tell me, just tell me what it's like or what to do, or isn't this the truth? And the guide's very good at batting that back and saying, you can't make generalizations. Again, I want to draw the distinction there, that in the spirit perspective, in the spiritual perspective, there is no answer. There is no solution. There is no right or wrong. We are the answer, we are the solution, and there is right and wrong. But again, if what we're doing is bringing out a manifestation, like a seed we carry within us, and we're trying to find good earth to plant that seed in so it can flower into, then difficulties in our lives actually offer us our best opportunity to address that distortion. So let me go back and be a bit more specific in terms of the lecture. So the parents have given you genetic material. They've given you a family culture, a village culture, a nation culture, a time reference, what century you're born in, what portion of the segment you're born in, what generation are you, Generation X, baby boomer, etc. All that comes naturally to you from the time that you arrived here. And you received influences from your parents and feedback from your parents on who you were before you were completely able to hold those subjective opinions, and all opinions are subjective. Some are based on a lot of objective criteria, but ultimately we pick and choose what we listen to. So you took the feedback that you got from your parents about who you were, and you took it in during a time period where you didn't have a lot of structure in your life independent of your family, so that you could create a context for this. So, for instance, if your parents were saying, "Oh, what a pretty baby," well, pretty's quite relative. You could be ordinary looking, and if somebody loves you, you're gorgeous. You can be ugly, and if somebody loves you, you're gorgeous. Okay? Now, you may accept that and think that you're very, very attractive and go out in the world saying, "I'm attractive." And if the energy in that is clean, then you may get responses from other people that say, "Yeah, you are." A lot of times people are reacting to our energy rather than an objective set of facts. However, when you go into the modeling agency or the acting auditions and you ask for a job, at that point you may come up against societal standards for attractiveness that you don't meet. Now, every once in a while you find a person who's a game changer. They come in and they get the part or become famous, and suddenly we say, we'll include that in our version of attractive. We'll widen our sense of what is attractive to include that person. But for a lot of us, the experience is not good enough. I don't care what your mom told you, you don't sing that well. You don't look that good. You're not what we're looking for. You're not our idea of attractive. So what I'm building here is whatever influences your parents give you. Then there's a secondary wave where society gives you feedback also, which may agree with what your parents told you or disagree. And as you walk through all these swinging doors and go down this, I think of it like a pachinko machine, where what happens with a pachinko machine is it's not like pinball. You've got 50 balls that are dumped on you, and all the levers are going, and you're wildly trying to control all these balls to get the best score. But it's impossible. There's too many balls. That's what life can feel like sometimes. So we go through childhood, which is, for most of us, not very controllable. And then we go through puberty, which is also not very controllable. And then we hit our 20s, where we're finally able to go out there and do something, and there's an explosion of energy in the 20s, which is natural and wonderful and great. And then there's the 30s, where there's some stabilization. And what's been true in the past, although as we spiritually grow, perhaps this age will advance forward. There's a place in the 40s where you say, whoops, what was I thinking? Now, on a pop psychology viewpoint, you can then turn to your mate and say, "Oh my God, I married my mother." Okay? And you may, at that point, make a change. What the lecture is inviting is that may be true. You may have married my mother. I'm trying to translate that into spiritual terms. You may have had a forcing current in you that wanted to complete something with your mother. Whether that was about getting acceptance or showing you how good you were or helping her, being supportive to someone. So you had a leftover forcing current from your mom, just picking examples, leftover forcing current from your mom, and you see a person who fits that, they're holding the other half of your forcing current. They're saying, you could do that with me. And so you get together. And it may work for 3 months and it may work for 30 years. Doesn't really matter. What the lecturer is saying is ultimately, if you're working with a current that's coming from childhood, ultimately this must fail. And it fails for 3 reasons. Number 1, you can't fix the needs of your childhood by enacting things in a certain way when you're 25, 30, 35 years old, 50, whatever age. Those needs, those unmet needs, those distortions, those forcing currents, those battles that you fought as a child, they're back there. And the person that you're working with is today. So even if you technically, superficially win the battle, it doesn't change the past. And so what happens is we continue. It doesn't make us feel fully satisfied. It will never make us feel fully satisfied. So that's number 1, that the problem's in the past, not in the present. And the joke that the image that I use on that is an old vaudeville joke. So in the old vaudeville stage joke, you have a light pole, and you've got a guy down on his hands and knees under the light pole, and the other guy comes in, he says, "What are you looking for?" He says, "I lost $1. And the guy says, "Where'd you lose it?" And the man points to the other side of the stage and says, "Over there." And his friend says, "Why aren't you looking over there?" He says, "The light's better over here." To some extent, because we're trying to resolve the situation, we're going to go for, to some degree, of obvious. We're going to try to solve the childhood battles with some similar elements of the battle that we had, which is why you're going to repeat picking one of your parents as an adversary in this situation of resolution. Now, the second problem with that is that the other person is not that parent. They have a whole different criteria. They came from a different family. They may look like, energetically look like, they're ready to meet you there. But they can't. Once again, battle from the past, it's with specific individuals. This is a different individual with not only free will, but with a different task than the person that you imagine that you're trying to work out a distortion around. So problem number 1 is the actual problem was in the past. Problem number 2 is that in the present you're not dealing with that person. Now, even if you dealt today with your parent, they're not the same person they used to be. So not only have you grown up 30 odd years, so have they. And when you try to resolve childhood stuff with someone who's 30 years older and either more mature, wiser, or not interested, or off on another adventure and not too interested in going back to the old stuff, you're not dealing with the actual situation. You are working with a recreation if you're trying to work out that battle in the present day. And the third thing that happens is that you're acting as if I get my way, everything will be okay. When the truth is, from a spiritual perspective, if you got your way, you'd just do it again. Because getting your way is not a alignment with spiritual principles. I'm presuming getting my way is in distortion rather than exercising and developing my ego. But in other words, if I need to get my way to prove I'm a person, one of the ways to deal with this is to take a list of spiritual principles, and there's a quickie list. It's not everything, but it's a useful list of spiritual principles that I used to teach with. It's called PC10. It's on the internet. It comes, it's pulled from a very large number of lectures. But what's nice about that is you can go down that list and say, I need to win. What spiritual law am I breaking? And trust me, you'll find one. In fact, you're going to find you're violating a lot of spiritual laws. If I get my way, violates the law of brotherhood. If I get my, I don't want to go into it, but it violates all of them. It's just a matter of degree.
Jan?
Yeah.
Yeah, this is Lila.
Hi.
I'm sorry, could you repeat what the name of that was?
The name of that is, it's called PC10, which means Pathworkers Contribution number 10.
Oh.
And it's in the additional materials on the internet. It's on my website. And I hand it out like sticks of chewing gum all the time, because for a one-page document, it's a powerful spiritual experience. And it lists 9, and I tease sometimes that they might have put 10, but they thought, oh God, that looks like the 10 Commandments. They are not laws. They call them principles. And the invitation is to see where your desires conflict with spiritual reality. Spiritual reality meaning we're all one, we're all in this together. I help you, you help me. Getting my way only works when my way assists you in getting your way. But when my way means I'm happy and I don't really care about you, that violates spiritual law. So these principles are useful for highlighting what your distortion might be like. Does that answer your question?
Yeah. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. So, the first part is that you're bringing this from the past forward, and that's not going to make you feel good. You're never going to resolve that hurt. You may get over it, you may release it, you may heal it, you may lovingly hold it and relax it until it's not an issue. But you can't fix it. It can't be fixed. Okay? Secondly, the person you're enacting with is not the person that created the original hurt. And thirdly, from a spiritual perspective, you're not supposed to fix it. You're supposed to look at it. You're supposed to realize that you're not getting anywhere and sit down and try to find out what is the false belief that I'm working with. Now, from a spiritual perspective, it just sounds a little esoteric. So let's go for abandonment. Now, if that child takes that in and because of their mix of task and spirit and 10,000 other factors, decides that there is no hope, then that child can go through life believing, I will never get my needs met. But people don't go through life simply saying, I won't get any, that's okay, I don't care. That's just not human nature. So what's going to happen is there's going to at some point be some protest about that. There's going to be a sense of feeling fed up and wanting to get your share of what is available. Now, if I mix in spiritual law with this, number one, you were not actually abandoned. You were invited by the parent that you chose to allow the fact that you believe there is abandonment to come to the surface. So I'm going to start over and go in a different direction and show you how vastly different this could be. So in the first case, the child feels abandoned and it tries to resign, it tries to not care, it tries to just put up with crumbs on the table. But I've never met anybody that really believes that 24/7 the rest of their life. Okay, so there's a dynamic that starts there based on a belief in abandonment. If you go back from a spiritual perspective, the parent chosen because they could not meet all your needs has in effect given you this experience because that belief that there won't be enough for me was already in you. That is one of your distortions. what principle, what spiritual law does that break? I didn't bring the list, so I don't have it in front of me. But let's say it breaks the law of brotherhood. And by that I mean it can't be real. In the law of brotherhood, we are all children of God. We are all divine beings. We are all equally important. We may not be as equally developed, but we're equally important in the universe. And the law of brotherhood says there is no abandonment. You're surrounded by angels. You're surrounded by spirits. We brought you here with love so you could learn that this feeling that it is possible to be abandoned cannot be true. And as you go on your life, perhaps the learning in that case would be, I do have enough. I don't mean to make light of this, but that's why little snippets of culture really stick in our minds. And what just came to me at that moment was Dorothy clicking her heels and saying there's no place like home. There's a reason that movie was so popular. There's a place in us that knows that the answer is inside. And as we go around trying to create it on the outside, we're in effect, to some degree, wasting our time. And if you look at almost, I haven't looked at every civilization, but I've looked at a lot of them, and they're all saying the same thing. There's no place like home. Love is in your heart. And you create based on what you're willing to create. That is a cultural belief system that I believe goes back to the people knowing spiritual truths and then having to deal with the craziness of reality, which argues with you. Now I'm going to go back to the abandonment. Child's in the crib, same thing, but this child has a different task and a different distortion. So this child doesn't get its needs met, and it says, how do I get my needs met? And I remember an interview with Robin Williams, and they said, how did you develop this rapid fire, never stop, insane ability to generate all this humor? And he said he used to entertain his mother because she was ill. And from that desire to be loving, to be a support for, to take a loved one's mind off their pain. From that place came a development of skill, a place where his mind, like little mushrooms, grew places to put all this ability to be creative and funny and fascinating, that he was later able to turn into a foundation stone for his later success. So a child that feels abandoned and feels like if I just did this or I just did that will go into an activity of some type with a lot more zest and enthusiasm, because what's really happening is they think that their life is at stake. I have to be smart. And what a child will do is it will find some place where it can excel or be seen or bring recognition. Now you can feel this splitting off into several areas. It will also be a place where if a child has no positive place to put its energy, it will put its energy into negativity. It will act out. It will become a rebel, a juvenile delinquent, a problem. Because human nature is, we need to be looked at. We need to be talked to. We need to matter, even if that attention is negative. At least it's something. So just from that one tiny example, perhaps you can see where, depending on the distortion that the soul is trying to resolve and the situation that it has created for itself, you can go off in millions of directions given the same circumstances with the same parents. And the reason it is specifically unique is we don't always know the forcing current, the compelling force in that spirit and what it needs to both manifest and resolve. So if we take the title of this lecture, which I'm not saying it's negative. I love the title of this lecture. But it tends to use words that we can give negative context to. So the compulsion to recreate and overcome childhood hurts. The positive aspect of that is the divine force compels us to get this, no matter how many times it takes, no matter how much effort it takes. We need to see our distortion, meet it face to face, hold it right up next to us, to feel the pain and experience where this is not a solution until the day we are able and willing to truly, without being in mask, to truly relax and let go. It's a longer sentence than compulsion to recreate and overcome childhood hurts, but that's why I love the title. It says it quite well. So from a spiritual perspective, the distortions that we create in terms of being in the wrong place, and by wrong place I mean we're in a place that is not in our best interests, but we have decided that we can succeed here and success is important. Success is more important than happiness. That's a distortion. If we choose someone for qualities that are superficial because we need to look good, that's a distortion. You don't want to be with somebody just because they have artificial qualities that other people admire. Okay? There are too many examples for me to list here of all the ways where we may reach out to someone and not be in truth about that person, but actually be in the grip of a childhood compulsion that we need to resolve. And what we're basically saying, if we enter a relationship in distortion, not always that way, but if we enter a relationship in distortion, this is one of the key places to look. That by looking at the childhood hurts, the places where we did not feel we were met, where we were not seen, where we did not have the opportunity to be divinely beautiful the way we naturally are. That all those things don't fade away. They simply go underground. And then they begin to resurface as we walk through life. So perhaps you can understand that I spent a lot of time trying to put this in context, because the simple fact that you marry your mother is just not very juicy. It's edible, it's interesting, people do that all the time. But to understand the deeper significance of that, that's where the guide says in a later lecture, when he talks about the relationship between man and woman, he talks about marriage and divorce, and he says you need to understand why you are where you are. Because if you don't understand what you've done, you're going to repeat it. So this is the common phrase of, if you do not understand history, you are destined to repeat it. And the spiritual reality inside that is that this compulsion is divine. This need, this task that we have assigned ourselves is the most important thing we have to do. And until we meet it and resolve it, we will be driven by it. Now, one of the things about spirituality is that, sometimes I feel like, just read the lectures, it's all in there. But where I can perhaps be helpful sometimes is I've read a large portion of them. And it's hard to know where to read and what to find. And so what I'm trying to do in these teleconferences is I'm trying to encourage you to read the lectures. But if you read one that's not relevant to you, it can be a little dry and dusty and leave a bad taste in your mouth, and you might walk away. So I'm trying to bring in context that I have learned that help me to understand the depth of this lecture. So in another lecture on New Age marriage and man and woman, the guide talks about divorce and says, yes, sometimes that is appropriate. There are no right and wrongs. There are no absolutes. Yes, sometimes that is not appropriate. But the question to be asked is this: there was a reason for the relationship. If you simply terminate the relationship and you have not found the underlying forces that caused you to link up with someone who is truly not appropriate for you in your stage of development, then you will naturally lumber on and perhaps do it again. So there's a 12-step phrase which is useful here, and that is never let yourself get too hungry or too tired or too desperate, because when you're in a situation of great need, you lose your sense of discernment. You'll eat junk food. You'll be with an inappropriate person, because the loneliness or the hunger or the pain of where you are is so great that you need immediate relief, and you may not be as careful as you might be. So if you've gotten into a relationship out of some level of desperation, that may be true. It may be an inappropriate relationship. It may not be a relationship that can flower. But the work that we do in Pathwork Process, if you look at where were you, how did you get to a place where you would make a choice like that? How did you not see the signs coming? What are you ignorant of about your nature? What are you in denial of, or what are you unconscious about, that you would not see this train wreck coming? The second question to ask is this person inappropriate? Or perhaps you are not willing to do what it takes to meet this person. So again, from a divine standpoint, every person you meet is perfect if you knew what the task was. And to walk away from a relationship because it doesn't suit you or does not seem to serve you may mean that you'll have to do that numerous times because you're looking for the wrong thing. And what Pathwork invites you to do, what the lecture on relationship invites you to do, is to pause. Just pause. Breathe. And see if you can now see forcing currents in you that you may not have seen 6 months ago, a year ago, 10 years ago. That a place of pain, as in any breakup of a relationship, brings to the surface things that may not have been apparent before. So it's a little bit like detoxing, okay, or literally vomiting up. You may not have seen it before, but now it's all out there on the table. Your behavior, your inability to communicate, your there's a lot on the table, and it doesn't all belong to the other party in the relationship in general. Some things belong to that person, but not everything. And if you can pause there and reflect and go through the different dynamics in the relationship and try to have a clearer understanding of where you were coming from. Were you coming from distortion, or were you coming from a very clear and enlightened place? Why would a clear and enlightened person take up with somebody who isn't clear and enlightened? Maybe you wanted to help. That's great. But did the other party have an equal desire to be helped? Or are you working on a forcing current from childhood where you gave yourself a sense of purpose by helping? And that may cloud your judgment, and you may not see where the other person is not as committed to being helped as you are to helping. I speak this from trying to find a positive place in both parties where they are enacting their spiritual task and they have become magnetized together. And that if they pull apart and don't look at the situation carefully, they'll just magnetize back into another relationship without having resolved it. But in the place where you realize, where awareness has come, I am in a dysfunctional situation, and you put it all out on the table and you look at it, then there's a possibility that you could have been looking at things from a skewed perspective. And if you shift your perspective around, you may be able to see something from a different angle. You may be able to learn something about yourself. You may be able to learn something about the currents that have moved in your life, because your relationship is not the only place this is going to show up. If you take the idea of marrying your mother, and you, in effect, your profession mirrors that same thing. If your mother was a strong person who believed that you must go out and help the community, and you grow up and you become a community worker, is that completely you? Or is that a desire to manifest your mom's values? That's not a bad thing, that's a great thing, and that's a powerful motivating force. Unless that's not what you want to do. What if you'd rather be a research scientist? And what if, in being a research scientist, you could find a depth of inner peace that would enable you to go through your spiritual task like a hot knife through butter? So as long as you're a community organizer, you're not doing that. You're involved with people, and there's a lot of details, and there's a lot of politics, and there's a lot of going out and talking to people, a lot of activity that could, in this example, that could prevent you from coming to a place of inner stillness and seeing what you need to see. And that's where sometimes following this so-called good life, this so-called good choice, actually is an attempt to run away from the task that some part of our being knows we're supposed to engage with. And sometimes you go there and then you circle back. So there is no right or wrong. What I'm talking about is a place where when you come to a realization that you are in a dysfunctional situation of whatever kind, in whatever level of relationship you can invent. Work, family, home, society, relationship with your cat, it doesn't matter. I remember one time I had a cat that after 4 or 5 years, the sad fact was she didn't like me. She wasn't getting her needs met. I was not affectionate enough. And I realized that I had it with having to pet this cat day and night at her command. We simply weren't suited. Now, that may sound trivial to some people, but for pet owners, perhaps some of you can empathize with this. I wound up adopting her out. And it was, went through a lot of emotions on that because it's wrong and you're not supposed to. And I have a lot of pet lovers and cat lovers, and even if they didn't say, we think you're wrong, they were shocked that I would adopt out a cat that I'd had for so many years. But the truth is, we weren't suited to each other. And in this particular story, I didn't lock her out of the house, and I didn't send her to the pound, and I didn't kill her. We found an adoptive home for her, and I have a friend of mine who checks in once in a while. Kat is as happy as she can be, wound up with a little old lady who has nothing to do day and night but pet her. She is in heaven. And the truth is, I was not suited for a pet that needed that much attention. Now, I'm not trying to be childish about this, but the truth is, in human relationships, we have competing needs, and we have different things that we want from each other. And sometimes the match doesn't work. In my process with the cat, because I'm a pathwork helper, I looked at the pathwork principles. I looked at a lot of spiritual stuff about brotherhood. I went down the list with the cat because it's just another manifestation. And there was a place where I tried to be more affectionate to her, thinking it was me. Perhaps I withhold. Perhaps I don't give enough of myself. Perhaps it would do me some good to do some cat petting right now instead of working on work. But over time, that wasn't the answer. Cat had a personality, and she needed a different owner. So, that's about all I needed to present myself. If anybody has any questions, number one, you're always welcome to interrupt and ask. I have no problem with that. And secondly, you're welcome to now if you'd like.
Jan, would you mind spending a minute talking about the connection between the perceived unrequited parental love that a child has with what's perceived as unrequited eros love and sexuality in an adult?
Okay. I hear your question, but I did one version of that, so I'm going to guess that I didn't give you what you needed. So, without asking for details, can you ask that question again from a more personal point of view? Just generic.
Well, the idea of the current of eros being recognized as an initial kind of strong feeling, and then if that's not requited,
Mm-hmm.
I suppose the usual thought of how that is requited is through sexual activity,
Okay.
but it's obviously not complete as love. But the idea of transformation of eros into love, I suppose, is
Okay.
what that is. And then it seemed to me that as a child, the unrequited parental love might have something to do with that confusion.
Okay, that's great. Thank you so much, because I have a much better idea now of what you were looking for. So one of my ahas when you're asking the question, and check with me, because if I'm not answering your question, call me on it. I hear in part of your question whether eros can be wrong. And my answer is...
About that, but I guess that's the way of putting it, yes.
Yeah. So I did the teleconference on soul movements and talked about eros at that time. And there are, I don't know, maybe there's 50, but one of the key lectures in Pathwork is lecture 44, The Forces of Love, Eros, and Sexuality. So that's a good one. But in answer to your question, my perception is that eros is never wrong. But eros can get you in a lot of trouble. Now there's a difference, and I want to speak to that. The difference between human perception and spiritual perception is eros is talked of as a soul movement. We're not talking about erotic, which is a forcing current. Talking about eros, we're talking about the place where your heart leaps across the room. From a spiritual perspective, your heart leaps across the room because that woman has the potential to help you work on your distortion. From she can help me by making me feel pleasure and I will open my heart, but it can also come from a desire to open your heart in a that says, okay, that'll do it. But opening your heart in a certain way is not a full-throttled surrender to relationship. So what I'm describing is that eros is a desire to get on with the spiritual task. That's the soul movement. Let's go. Let's do another chapter. And from that perspective, eros can never be wrong. But
So Dan, hello, it's Andrea here.
Yes.
Are you saying that really the key to it is to have consciousness around it?
Yes.
So to have consciousness around eros and why we're drawn to this person. Not looking at that person as they're the answer to they're going to give us what we didn't have, but what comes up demand on that person to the perfect person.
Yes.
Yeah.
So if your eros can lead you down some roads that are painful and difficult. But from a spiritual perspective, so what? You may need to go down those roads. And your eros knows it. So I think of eros like having one of those puppies that just cannot be controlled. And you've got the puppy sitting on your lap, and the next thing you know, it's across the room and it's on the lap of somebody who's 20 years younger than you. And you're going, oh my God, I know I liked that person, I know I was attracted to that person, but I would never have let on that I was attracted to that person. But the puppy is over there. That's what eros can feel like. It is spontaneous, it is free, it goes wherever it wants to go. Well, that may or may not be about that person. That might be about eros saying, honey, we need to be around other people. We need a relationship. Stop judging everybody and let's be more open because I need to live, I need to breathe. Eros is the voice saying, life, where's life? I want to live. Where's pleasure? I want pleasure. Where's righteousness? Where's righteousness in the best sense of the word? Where is divinity? Where is my next opportunity to grow? That's what eros can tell us. But when eros does that, it's like a child. You don't let a child choose your outfit for the day. It can suggest. But there are other elements that come into play. So I gave an example in another teleconference of when you walk, and I know this is a girl example, but I'm a girl, so there you go. You walk by a shop window and you see a red dress, and you are attracted to that red dress. And you go in and you buy it, but of course it doesn't look good on you and it sits in your closet. What was that about? Well, the eros was telling you we want more femininity, we want more feminine energy in our lives. That would do it. That's one way to do it. Eros does not demand that you do that particular activity or what it is specifically pointing you towards. So if we think of eros as an indicator of flow that wants to occur, then we use our intelligence, we use our ego, we use all the other capacities we have as people to say, is that the specific best answer, or can I broaden my view and see a lot of options here?
Tim?
Yes. Hang on one second. I'm going to bookmark that I didn't finish answering Harry's question. Okay? And I'm open to whatever you want to say.
I'm sorry, that's what you said?
Well, I'm personally bookmarking that I have one more part to answer, but this may help me, so please go ahead. No,
Okay.
please go ahead.
I thought you had finished.
No, that's okay. Go ahead.
Okay. Well, when Harold was asking his question, the question that came into my head, and I'm not going to, because I don't have a psychology background, so I may state this wrong, but there's something, the Oedipal complex,
Mm-hmm.
Oedipal, isn't that right?
Yep.
Where you fall in love, you are romantically in love with one of your parents,
Mm-hmm.
and I don't know if this is what he was getting at or not, but this is what popped in my head as he was asking this question.
Okay.
And so, because when he said unrequited love, well, that's not realistic, right? And again, I don't have a psychology background, but my understanding of the Oedipal complex is that, that it's not realistic, but you're jealous of the same-sex parent because they've stolen this person you're in love with, right? Isn't that how it goes?
Yeah. And that's perfect. That's going to lead me right back into answering Harry's question. So thank you. Okay? So here's how those two parts come together. In terms of spirituality and psychology, where they meet is that the Oedipal stage is a natural stage of development in a human being. That's the place where we are seeing that we as girls or we as boys are going to behave in a certain way in society. But we're still little, so girls should marry men. I have a great idea. My daddy's the best man I know. That's the actual psychological origin of the Oedipal complex. It's a natural phase. And the intention is that we will move through that. But that at that point, what the little girl is saying is, I'm a girl, girls marry men. I'm just picking this. I know that there are other solutions, and I'm more than happy, but you can't put every example into one analogy. I see the model that society is showing me, and this would work because I like my dad. And, oh, I can already see it coming. There she is. There's my rival. The positive of that is the child is already getting a whiff of the dynamics that occur in human existence. From a very immature place, from a very tiny place. But the positive is, that's like playing with dolls. That's how we learn. And same thing for the boys. They say, oh, I will a real positive. Trying to figure out, how does this fit together? Games that little children play. What we see. An outward amount of information. And as gravitate because we don't have the more complex answer. Oedipal okay, but an Oedipal complex is part by its parents. Any adoration that can grow in wonderful child. Feel special. You're can feed a distortion and there will be consequences to enact complex social situations. And the child does not know what it's triggering in those two adults. So that's where the Oedipal stuff kind of fits in on a different level. Now, if I go back to the question that I kind of ran off with, Harry was asking about sexuality. I love Lecture 44 on Love, Eros, and Sex because of how it speaks about Eros, making it wonderful and gentle and a guide to what you should be doing instead of something that you need to control. I also love it because it talks about sexuality, and so does Lecture 207, 207, which is the spiritual significance of sexuality. The guide speaks of sexuality as one manifestation of the life force. And in human culture, because we are throttled a little bit, human culture across the board has something to say about sexuality of its members. It may say go for it or it may say don't go for it, but it has something to say. And an individual may not get served no matter how generous or loving a society is, just like an individual may not get served no matter how wonderful its parents are. Okay? Or it may fit in beautifully, depends on the situation. But society has something to say about sexuality precisely because sexuality is such a potent manifestation of life force. Society needs to keep this manifestation of life force in a specific channel. It needs to keep this force from jumping the banks and flooding the town and breaking rules and laws. Yes. I thought I heard a question. Didn't hear a question. Okay. So, if sexuality is a primary channel for life force, basically what we have done is by entering into human life, we knew that. We knew that sexuality is powerful. We knew that it could channel an incredible amount of energy, that it would align with procreation and survival and hardwired instincts that are positive and have tremendous negative possibilities. Okay? So we are basically, when we engage with sexuality energetically or technically, we have a tiger by the tail. And what the lecture, what 44 suggests, is that we both honor the sexual impulses, but we also bring them into a more spiritual context. Yes, we want pleasure. Yes, our bodies want sexual satisfaction. But human beings have built civilizations based on, hang on a minute, relax, we're going to distract you for a bit, and then we're going to try to give you some opportunity. Human societies are built on structures so that the channel is allowed but is held. And societies, just like parents, don't do that perfectly. So this is perhaps where all these elements come together. So you have a compulsion to recreate, and that can start with an eros. The eros wasn't about doing it wrong again. The eros was about healing. Eros looks across the room and says, that person, that's it, that's the one. And you translated that as the perfect one, the best one, the most pleasurable experience. And your eros knew a little bit more than you did and said, no, that's going to get us in terrible trouble. We're finally going to move through this block. Can you feel the difference between a wider, enlightened viewpoint and sometimes the simplistic interpretations that we give it? And also the selfish interpretations. We don't want to get in trouble. There's a place when we talk about negativity that I feel isn't spoken about in a positive sense. And that is, we don't want to change. If you think you truly want to change, think again. And that by manifesting as human beings, we have gotten ourselves born into a universe that never stops. You can't stop growing, you can't stop living unless you die. You can't hit the pause button. Okay? And that creates dynamics. And that reveals us in our distortions. We make mistakes. We make mistakes upon mistakes upon mistakes. And there's a positive quality to that. But there's also a place where we would really rather cement the planet and turn it into a parking lot so that we don't have to feel these chaotic feelings, so that we do not have to endure the pain of separation and loss, where we'd like to guarantee at least 2 hours of pleasure in the next 2 hours. Could I just have that? Just 2 hours of pleasure. Okay? But behind that demand, you don't want 2 hours of pleasure. Nobody who really wants 2 hours of pleasure mandates that's what's going to happen. Someone who truly wants pleasure understands that there is pleasure in learning, pleasure in growth, pleasure in development. And that moment by moment it may not feel good, but 30 years from now, you're going to be happy with your life. So what I'm saying here is that there needs to be an acknowledgement. It's in the lectures, and I believe it strongly. There needs to be an acknowledgement that we are resistant to change. That we are resistant to our own plan. So you've got a push-pull kind of thing. One of the things I carry, I have a little special box that I carry and to workshops sometimes, and for years and years and years I carried one of those little silly Chinese finger pulls. You know, where when you're a kid, you stick your fingers in and you can't get them out if you pull. That's what human life is like. And spirituality, and this is what you spoke of when you said, just relax, just breathe, just move with it. Spiritual life is about very slowly and carefully realizing that you're not trapped, that you're fine, that there is no great harm coming at you, or if there is harm, it's not going to kill you. And even if it's going to kill you, I wonder what this is all about. Now please understand, I'm not saying that when the car comes at you, you stand in the street saying, maybe I'll die today, we'll see what happens. Because I can imagine that if you go upstairs and talk to your team, they would say, why didn't you get out of the way? And you say, I thought it would be fun. And they say, do you know how much work it took to get you down there in human form? Do you know what we're going to have to do? We're just going to have to do this again. Because no, that was not the message. As a matter of fact, you cut the plan short. So the next time we make up a plan, we're going to change it so you can't do that. What I'm talking about is a place where when you find yourself in harm's way and you do what you have to do to get out of harm's way, it may cost you a broken leg. It may cost you, I really don't want to get into story, but there's a lot of permutations here. But the important thing is, what did you learn? How did you get in harm's way? Were you drunk? Were you stoned? Were you weeping so hard you couldn't see traffic? Or do you have a death wish? And translation of death wish would be, are you unwilling to do the work and secretly looking for a way out? So you remember the game Chutes and Ladders? There are places of self-sabotage and suicide. They want to hit the reset button and saying, this is too hard, I can't do this. Now, it may be too hard. Keep in mind that you came up with this plan. And in this plan, you gave yourself absolutely everything you need to complete the plan. And what this lecture is about is another way of looking at what you gave yourself. Your childhood experiences and your childhood hurts. Not the ones that are resolved. We don't work with the ones that are resolved. Those are fine. And we resolve phenomenal amounts of process work. Children are astounding in their capacity to work through incongruities, to work through hypocrisy, to work through abandonment issues. And that's why if you put two children in exactly the same situation, you can have one child coming out saying, I never get what I want, and the other child coming out saying, I made it. I survived. Life is okay. Same situation. They come out with totally different points of view. So your hurts from childhood that remain with you in full adulthood have meaning. And you do need to resolve them. But if you're trying to resolve them by creating the battle again with other people and this time coming out victorious, that's not really dealing with the distortion. That's trying to win. And the idea that one person wins and the other person loses is a distortion. The unified look, the unified point of view there would be, yes, I need to heal myself. Yes, I need to work through my distortions. I wish to grow and transform, because when I do, I contribute to the positive influence in the universe. When I win, everyone wins. When someone else wins, I win. But on the planet, the first place trophy usually only goes to one person. So we're left with the illusion of losing, even though we might be the winner. Some of you might have experienced a teacher when you were little that basically awarded a grade or a prize or recognition to the child who tried hardest. Now, I was an A student and I resented that because I worked hard for that A and I didn't want any kid that tried hard to get extra credit. Until I was 14 and I was a pudgy, fat, clumsy, four-eyed, intellectual kid. And when I was 14, I decided to make something of myself spiritually. Now, you can imagine this kid on the track. I came in so dead last, everybody else was in the showers by the time I finished the track. But my teacher gave me an A. Not for the year, for the semester. She couldn't go that far. And she gave me an A for the semester because she just couldn't help it. I tried so hard. She'd never seen anybody try so hard. But that didn't mean I had athletic ability. And that didn't mean that I could meet an objective standard. She just wanted to let me know that she'd seen me. And she gave me recognition that I really appreciated. And I certainly understood why she only gave me a B for the whole year, because you can only do so much with the body that you manifest. So, perhaps on that silly note, are there any other questions right now? Okay.
Thanks, Jan.
Oh, no worries. Very grateful to have everyone here. The teleconference in 2 weeks is going to be on Lecture 160, The Conciliation of Inner Split. Now, I will tell you right now that I have not figured out yet why I picked that lecture. But somehow it goes with this one, and I was inspired to do that. I may bring in other lectures, because it may turn out that I can't get my head around that concept. But I wanted to pick some unjuicy lectures and show people the juice in them. So I took one that I knew was a great lecture that isn't normally taught or talked about. I thought it would be fun to explore. So if you choose to join us then, you are welcome. Thanks very much for being here. And thank you so much for your questions. Because that's what the work is about. Your questions, your issues, not concepts. So thank you again. And have a nice evening or morning. Okay.
Thanks,
Bye-bye.
Jan.
Thank you.
Love, be still and know that I am God, that I am with you. Be still and feel that I am real in every light, Not since you said goodbye and wandered off through the dark and forgot your way home. Oh, love, be still and know that I am God. That I am with you. Be still and hear that I am near. Your every breath, that's what I live through. Be still and know be still and know that I am God. 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 Be still and know. Be still and know. Be